So recently I was sent a video from a very huge channel actually in classical music, Nahre Soul. That's the name of the creator and the pianist. I'm almost certain that I mispronounced her name, so apology for that. She's a classical pianist that really knows how to present herself. It's a very, very interesting channel. And obviously 400,000 subscribers, then that means that you know how to do your stuff. And disclaimer, I'm not making a video to criticize her work at all. I'm just, presenting some facts of this video that I think need a little bit of correction. And also I'm hoping that when we make these videos that people get, a little bit of a different perspective, even the creator of the pianist that we take as a centerpiece in this video, and think like, okay, this could be true. So my intention is not to expose people or to say negative things about them. I respect every musician, every colleague in this field. I wish sometimes the reverse were true as well. But sometimes when people present things on the internet, on YouTube, certainly when you have such a large following, that you take a position, you influence people as well. And I think that's just that's the modern way of having a conversation or a discussion or a debate, if you want. It's nothing more than that. This video, though, is very interesting because what she's doing here is giving her 9 points to come to the correct tempo. And at the beginning of the video, she makes a case for not following your feeling all the times, because feeling is sometimes something that changes. You can feel hungry, as she says, you can feel tired, you can feel excited, and it all affects the tempo. But tempo choice, and that I 100% support, we are completely in one line on this in this regard. Tempo choice determines the performance, and the performance is, of course, the character of the piece, is the composition. And so when you change the tempo, you change the composition, you change the nature or the mood or whatever of the composition, the basics of the composition. And so it's important to come to certain objective elements that could help you pass your feelings to come to what she claims to be a correct tempo. And, I'm going to share a clip here, a short fragment. The link, of course, as always, is in the description box. And then we come back to that because there is a lot we can say about this.
I'm going to play Chopin's Opus 10, number 3. For me, this music has a lot of warmth, embrace, longing, and also a little bit of a nonchalant quality. I think that comes from the left hand. This rhythm. So this is one of those pieces where most people play it much slower than the written metronome marking. Chopin's marking is 8th note equals 100, which is this. I find that it's a bit dense because there are inner lines happening, and this is what perhaps makes people play this at a slower tempo. Also, in analyzing the music, I think it's very helpful to observe the harmonic pace, or in other words, how often is the harmony changing in the music versus the density of the notes. The harmony is moving at a moderate pace. I wouldn't say that this is overly complex. Let's imagine this melody at a higher register with less notes. I think then this tempo will make sense. So I've been playing this etude for many years, and I've always chosen a slower tempo. It was simply something that I was just used to from all of the recordings and performances that I've heard of this piece. But recently, I think there's also potential for the faster tempo, and I find it a little more appealing. Maybe not completely 100, but closer to it. It really depends on the piano, but if I also focus on the lilting aspect of it, I start to hear the melody in a different way, in a more casual, flowing way instead of this really heavy, warm, profound way. So I don't know, I think these kinds of things shift, and there's always room for changing interpretations.
So imagine tomorrow you would get a phone call from Paris, and there is a certain Mr. Frédéric Chopin who calls you and say, hey, you have an interesting YouTube channel. I invite you, you get some free lessons. And you fly to Paris and you enter his apartment. You see this beautiful player there, this man standing next to it, the creator of that music, the composer we all admire, the pianist that we admire, although we never heard him play, but the descriptions of his performances are really mind-blowing. And would you really sit at the piano taking your metronome? Would not be necessary to take your own metronome, because Chopin's metronome was documented to never leave his piano. And would you say, Mr. Chopin, before I start with this etude, I must say that only if I play the piece one octave higher, your tempo makes sense. I mean, I'm sorry to ridiculize a little bit like that, but I cannot summarize this better than this. What makes today's musician, it's not that I would want to criticize Miss Sol. I mean, no, but she makes the point for it, and a channel of 400,000 subscribers, and I've scrolled through the comment section, and apparently nobody is saying like, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense at all. If Chopin's metronome mark doesn't make sense to you, it's up to you to fix it. You cannot correct Chopin. That metronome mark is perfect for the composition. And, you know, I might sound now a little bit strong, but I mean, how obvious is that? On the other hand as well, the metronome mark serves to expose other musicians for playing too slow. But when it comes to prove or to show the implication of that metronome mark in the modern reading, what you believe is Chopin's meaning, he meant like this, then it's too fast. But you cannot have it both ways. You cannot say at one hand, I take this metronome mark, 8th note 100, to prove that people who play it in 8th note 50, which is perfectly aligned again with whole beat concept that we present here, but that's true for all the pieces of Chopin, for majority of the metronome marks in the 19th century, which solve all metronome problems at once. Either you take that metronome and say, okay, 8th note 100 is not 8th note 50. And because of the 8th note 100, I expose you for playing too slow. And at the same time, not using the 8th note 100 for your own performance, going there also 25% below. It's not 50% below, it's 25%. She plays around 80 when she demonstrates that piece. And so when it comes to musicians that want to stick to a metronome mark, or just take the metronome mark at least as an inspiration, then stick to that. And if it doesn't work, think about why it doesn't work. Even if you want to use it as a guide for tempo reconstruction. But think about also this poor Chopin. When you would be there in his room, in his study room, you wouldn't make the same remark. Because suddenly you would realize that what you actually are saying, musically, he was not a great light, you know, he was not a great person, because he didn't even realize that this tempo doesn't make sense in this register of the piano. Obviously, Miss Sol didn't mean that. She didn't think about it, but it's actually the implication of what she says for an audience of 400,000 subscribers. That's the reason, again, why I make this video. It's in a way unbelievable. There is no end. There is no solution that this single beat modern reading of the metronome is a dead end. There is no path leading to a result. There is not something like a single beat application. Many people think what we present is just half as fast as people play today. That's absolutely nonsense. Some pieces we can play in single beat in the modern reading, but the majority, that's just not true. Some people said about these Chopin etudes, yeah, there are a lot of recordings in single beat. They are not existent. Yes, some pieces are played in an incredibly technically difficult way. Where also there you can imagine, you can ask like, why not do that on a playable piano without this double escapement? But anyways, not the entire set of etudes. And if you think that the etudes, the metronome marks of the etudes are already problematic, I have news for you. Chopin was not interested in being the next Liszt or Thalberg. And if you see his etudes, they might be called revolutionary. And in a sense, they are, of course, an evolution compared to Kramer and Clementi that he admired a lot. But it's not alike of the likes of the transcendental etudes of Liszt. I mean, there's a complete different universe. So if already there you have big, major problems, I have news for you. The 19th century with these thousands of metronome marks are waiting for you to really obliterate this vision that the single beat modern interpretation of that metronome mark really makes sense, because it doesn't. And that's the whole point. When you say feeling is not something that should guide us, then what else than the metronome mark given by the composer? And why not think about this in this way, that the metronome mark is not just like something in the sky. Chopin didn't take a metronome mark to give something that's not correct, that's not representing his actual ideal tempo for that piece. As didn't Beethoven, as did not Schumann. Schumann did not take his metronome to just give a tempo that doesn't make sense. And just if you think about it from this perspective, yeah, you replace feeling by what? In this video, actually, what she's doing, she replaced feeling by feeling. All the 9 points are feeling. I feel the density a little bit too much. I feel it's a little bit too fast. The room can give the impression that. Then also in the video you will see the famous introduction by Bernstein, which everybody's so admiring. She also says it's cool. It's one of the most ugly introductions ever in music history, where a genius like Glenn Gould comes on stage and say, hey, what you are doing makes no sense. Listen to what I have discovered in Brahms. Oh, but he plays slower. And so Mr. Bernstein felt the need to, before the concert, can you imagine that? Before the concert, where this young genius pianist came on stage to say, it's not my tempo, and it's not what Brahms has written. Well, I have news for you. It's what Brahms has written. It's very close. This Mr. Gould was a genius in some regards, also on that. And then it's like, you know, further in the video you will see also tempo rubato, of course, is there. Like, we go always slower. That's the escape, guys. Don't do it. Tempo rubato. And then there is you will see in the video, I will not show it, there is a piece by Debussy where Debussy marks the tempo shifts. If composer doesn't mark a shift in tempo, he means you stick to the original tempo. And granted, there is a certain fluctuation, but in all the 19th century sources you will see one thing. Certainly when they talk about a correct way of playing of older music, like for instance in Czerny's Opus 500, he was the best student of Beethoven, so, but also in Chopin's writings, and also in what we know from Chopin's students, that tempo fluctuation should be subtle, almost unnoticeable. It goes up and down, also up. So if you are not able to reach that metronome mark already, like in the Opus 10 number 3, the middle section should be played a little faster. That's marked by Chopin. So what are you going to do there? Slow down again because your feeling dictates that's a little bit rubato required. It's not indicated in the score. So forget about feeling. At the end, of course, your interpretation matters on top of that metronome mark and that tempo indication. It's not like sticking to a metronome mark that makes you play like a robot. That is, of course, not what we mean. There is always room for interpretation, but it needs to be subtle. But first, you have to reconstruct, you have to be able to reconstruct what that metronome mark means. And when you go to a single beat reading, then it applies to all the metronome marks that you have from the 19th century and go over them. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. When tempo is an accurate representation of the composer's intention, and you will not find a single source in the 19th century not saying it like that, or saying the other way around, that the tempo indication of a metronome mark is not a tempo indication. When it is an accurate representation of the ideal tempo of the composer, then, well, you have only two solutions: the modern reading or the old pendulum reading, where two ticks are actually up and down. The metronome ticks represent the subdivision of the note value in the metronome mark. It's only those options you have. There is not something like we take 20% from the single beat and Chopin would agree with that. Well, if he would agree with 20% slower, I have news for you. He would have given the metronome mark 20% slower. It's that simple. But don't go into this path that is like all musicologists today, when they talk about metronome marks, and also teachers, they take it. I mean, they have no answers to give other than, yeah, metronome mark, that's only for the beginning of the piece. Like, yeah, as if that's somewhere written in that way, that when you play, for instance, Chopin Etude number, Opus 10 number 1, just take any. After 4 bars, you slow down the tempo. Yeah, because it's only for the first. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Or tempo rubato will solve everything. Well, tempo rubato was described as a very subtle influence of time, almost unnoticeable for the audience. And in the case of Chopin, it's to be seen how far he was willing to go there. Left hand steady in tempo. How many students describe that? Go play some nocturnes, the famous D flat major. Do it. Dotted quarter note 50. Everybody plays that in whole beat. Why? That's the only way of making these runs, these bel canto ornamentation, play them in while sticking to the tempo. So again, it just blows my mind that see an intelligent pianist like that. And I'm not blaming her. It's the system, it's the education system that is to be blamed. We all study 5, 6, 7 years. In some countries, it costs a fortune to study, and those teachers don't even have something better to offer to musicians, to pianists, than, fantasy stories. Listen, I repeat again, a metronome mark is an exact representation of the composer's intention. When you want to honor that intention, you have to match that tempo, because when you change that, you change the composition, and it would be something that very few composers would actually allow you to do. In the case of Chopin, there were very few students. Like you had this very young student, what was his name? Fitch, or I forgot his name, but he died very young, of which Chopin accepted some changes in interpretation, because he said, you feel it like I do. But even that were minor changes. The basics were there. All the other students had to play probably exactly what you... I mean, there are no sources that say, like Beethoven, Schumann, Chopin, just to name a few, they were all fine if you just, took something. Because we know some modern composer. I have a friend who composes music, and when I play music of him or her, then she's fine with me taking that. Yeah, but that was not Beethoven. That was not Chopin. Who was a great performer, had an idea, a vision, something very precise in his mind that he put into notes with a metronome mark. So when that's the case, and that is the case historically, and you want to honor the intention of the composer, well, there is only one way, that's to stick to at least understand the metronome mark, at least be able, let me say it like that, you should be able to play like a robot in tempo marked by the metronome. You should be able to take your metronome and play the entire piece in the metronome mark as it is indicated. Not saying you have to play like a robot, but when you cannot do that, just sit down and reflect. And before you go to all kinds of deflective theories, also here based on feeling, be honest and say like, something is not right. And then my final point, guys, I want to make, when I can only admire when she says like, you have sometimes to think out of the box. Sometimes we're just, we get up in the morning and we get to bed in the evening with the same recordings, with the same kind of performances all the time, listening to that all the time. And that's true, Whereas the individual expression in the Chopin competition, I think when you are really an outspoken voice there as a performer, you would not even get into the main rounds. But when people say, okay, we have to think out of the box, great. You sometimes need to change your tempo, like Ashkenazi made the case. Yeah, great, that's what we're doing here on this channel, based upon actually historical information that for the first time we can interpret in a way that we are actually able to play. And we enjoy our lives very much. But guess what the reaction is? Oh yeah, that's not possible. That slow is not possible. So the out-of-the-box mentality, the open-mindedness, so to say, is only true for one direction, when you go up in speed. When you actually go down in speed, when you say, okay, 200 years ago, people had a horse as the fastest tool of transportation. Not saying that it necessarily is connected to the way we played piano or music. But then, of course, then people would say, this doesn't make sense. It's so slow, I cannot feel the bow, I cannot feel the lines, I cannot feel this, I cannot feel the melody, the harmonic structure. Well, that's feeling. And it's also partly education, and most importantly is just opening your mind. Guys, this is again a too long video, and I know I'm repeating a lot of stuff, but it's necessary. It's necessary. We have to bring the message that, listen, if you want to stick to what you are used to do, if you want to just continue what you have learned in conservatories, that's fine. What they teach you in the best conservatories today is actually the evolution of piano playing. That's something that has a right to exist. I'm not challenging that. In a way, that's an historically informed performance practice as well, because it's just an evolution. But what you have to stop doing is thinking that when you play like that, you actually represent Chopin's, Beethoven's, Schumann's, or Brahms' interpretation or desire. Because it's not. And it's so easy to just point to that. And when you are fine with disconnecting that, I think no musician is really fine with that. We'll need time. But when you're fine with that, there's nothing wrong. But when you want to honor the composer's intention, that's what Miss Sol said at the beginning. The tempo choice is your way to go. And then you have only one option. And that's the whole beat metronome practice. And that's a practice that's not my theory, because we have shown that it works. The 32 sonatas are on the channel. The symphonies are all recorded except the 9th. And Alberto is almost ready with 50% of Chopin's music in whole beat, exactly in the tempo indicated by Chopin and not about. Okay, guys, hope you didn't mind this long monologue. Hope you took something from it. And if that's the case, and you're new here, would appreciate you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell also so you don't miss any uploads. And if you want to push us really beyond all barriers, for instance, writing an insanely thick book about the evolution of tempo, that's now reaching 750 pages. I know it sounds insane, and it is insane. Then there is a Patreon page where you can support us and also talk to me. Once a month we have a cool hangout with the patrons, and it's always nice. We not only talk about tempo, we make the world better by saving energy and things like that. You cannot imagine how much expertise we actually have in that Patreon group. So feel free to check it out. And for now, thanks for watching. See you soon again. Bye.